Okay, and welcome to yet another special episode of the Quadruple D. And like last week, I'm largely abandoning my previous format. As the title of this episode notes, FCC censors Trump critics Colbert and Kimmel. So I'm going to get into that, and it's going to be a pretty special episode because of that. So, in response to Jimmy Kimmel being suspended from his late night talk show, my Facebook comment on the subject has received at least 5.4 thousand reactions, and that's growing, with most of them being positive reactions. And why is that? Well, I could take some credit for that, of course, but that might be me tooting my own horn a little bit too much. It's because of the idea that I expressed. I wrote in a comment on Variety's news article on Kimmel's indefinite suspension. I said, Jimmy Kimmel and Colbert could start a show together and have plenty of success, even now. So a lot of people like that idea and they agree with it. Now, I could have said especially now, and that would have been accurate. Or I could have added Jon Stewart into the mix as a third person for that show, but you get the point. The point is that now people understand the importance of having these comedic figures who are sometimes critical of power. And we've seen the attempts to censor critics. And I do have to say something before I get into greater detail here. Solidarity with Jimmy Kimmel and Stephen Colbert is important right now, possibly more important than some people out there would think. I know some people would roll their eyes and they say, oh, they're just celebrities and blah, blah, blah. They are actual victims of official government censorship of critics. Now, obviously, Trump and the FCC will use some flimsy excuse aside from their hurting Trump's feelings, but don't fall for it. Just as importantly, I want you to put aside practically every critique you had of those two, of Kimmel and Colbert. Maybe you weren't a big fan, maybe you didn't watch them, you were offended by some of their jokes, or think they didn't go far enough in some commentary, etc., etc. I might get some of those critiques. I might understand those, but that's not really relevant right now. The main thing is to recognize they are victims of censorship, plain and simple. And don't let these supposed free speech warriors on the right get away with this blatant hyper hypocrisy under some flimsy pretense. Don't fall for it. On that note, yes, the critics of Kimmel and Colbert have also made an appearance in the Variety article's Facebook comment section that I had commented on. So don't get me wrong, they are there as well. Some people said they were getting low ratings and that's why they were fired. Yeah, okay. And that's partly because MAGA people are so stupid overall and they don't understand how that argument is devoid of context. As is very common knowledge, viewership of traditional broadcast television has officially fallen in recent years, and now it's below 20% of total TV viewing in the US. As one source notes, the rise of streaming has been accelerated by platforms offering more flexible, on demand viewing experiences, giving consumers the ability to watch what they want when they want. Now, that's why ratings on traditional TV are in decline. It's not because, oh, people don't like Jimmy Kimmel and Stephen Colbert. Actually, they get relatively good ratings on their shows you know so don't be fooled by that argument. It's stupid. It's obvious that they're looking for a way to turn this around and blame them for the censorship that is happening. Anyone saying this is just about ratings is either stupid or being disingenuous. It is Trump firing critics, plain and simple. As I noted on Facebook, Kimmel's show ran for 22 years. not just 1 year or 5 or even 10, 22 years. And it would have kept running if the network didn't have to cave to crybaby Trump. And of course you might say they didn't have to cave to them, and that's debatable, but the FCC was threatening them. And I'll get into more details on that later. But don't be fooled. It is about caving to the orange faced crybaby. So, a dolt named Patrick Russo responded to one of my comments. He said, quote, "Two-thirds of the country can't stand them. They are damaged goods. No companies will ever donate to them or give them advertising deals. They could start podcasts, I guess, like a lot of people do. I bet they get only like 5 to 10K viewers, though, and that highballing it. Face it, the left, the Democrats, the liberals are so fucked. You guys turned to the dark side, and now you are facing the reaction from the light side. Well, what a way to frame it, you know? So I responded, what is the dark side? I just want to see how stupid your brain gets as you try to explain. Jimmy Kimmel was on air for 22 years. If you think that's a sign of catastrophically bad ratings, your skull may be full of rocks already. He is only canceled for making fun of crybaby Trump, and corporations are semi fascistic at best and cave to power because they want a share of it. This had nothing to do with ratings. Trump's FCC prick threatened to pull the network's FCC license, which makes their decision slightly more understandable. But still, and that's the end of my response to that doofus. And also, he said the light side. Really, the light side that had a billionaire, now apparently a trillionaire, Nazi literally Sieg Heiling as he went on to cut pediatric cancer research and also killed millions with US aid cuts? Is that the kind of light side we're talking about? How about the light side that shifted the narrative so far to the right that by now, even believing in due process is somehow a far left talking point? How about a light side that thinks Trump should be able to just bomb Venezuelan boats anytime he wants and just claim they were drug cartel boats? No arrest, no trial, no laws, no jurisdiction, just a bomb against a boat anytime you want. Just kablooey. And all of the evidence is lost at sea, and you can just claim a victory. No accountability because there's the Supreme Court decision saying that Trump has absolute immunity. You can just bomb any boat that he wants, apparently, and it's not the same as you or I bombing a boat. That's something that would get us in a prison probably if they were able to prove that we were guilty of such a thing. But no, if you get into the White House, you can commit any crime you want, anytime you want, for any or no reason at all, and nobody can do anything about it. Thanks, U.S. Supreme Court. You really gave the world a gift with that one. And how about a light side that is threatening to invade Canada? Not not very light to me. That sounds pretty dark and pretty strange. Canada is a key ally, and they're threatening to invade Mexico and Greenland and all of that crap. So, yeah, apparently that's all just being on the light side. You know, boy, this poster sure was an idiot. To look at everything that's going on and frame it as if Trump is on the side of the light and all his critics are in the darkness. I mean, it's just so fucking strange. Obviously, I could get more into the dark side of Trump's Epstein files stuff, that the ties with Epstein, or his creepy comments about his own daughters, and so on and so forth. But I think you get the point here. One person reacted to one of my Facebook comments with a laughing John Cena meme saying, quote, "Me watching the cancel culture squad receive what they've been putting out into the world," end quote. So to that I responded, when did Biden or Obama use the FCC to get a late night TV host fired? And, that's a very valid point. That did not happen under those two, even though, remember, they were saying that Obama was going to be like a dictator. Well, certainly you could say that he abused power as presidents often do, in one way or another. But did he do something like this? Did he get a TV host fired? Not to my memory. I'd like to see that comparable example. There is none, because that was not really a thing that happened during those two administrations. And remember, they also said Obama was going to have these FEMA camps and death panels. Now nobody even talks about those, because guess what? They also didn't happen, because right wingers are liars and they often just abandon their talking points when their conspiracy theories are just debunked by reality itself, and they are things that don't happen in reality. So they just stop talking about them. These things that, they were harping on and harping on time and time again as if they were serious topics. Well, they just drop them like a hot rock, and somehow people just forget about them. And as Mark Maron noted, another comedian, he said this wasn't people on, he noted that this isn't people on Twitter trying to get somebody canceled. This was the FCC applying pressure to do it. Official government censorship. I'm not directly quoting Mark Maron, but that's the gist of what he said. And it was all under the flimsy premise of defending Charlie Kirk, the person who was recently assassinated. But both Stephen Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel were also longtime Trump critics. Of course, that supposedly uh, didn't figure into any of this at all. Oh no, that couldn't be a factor here. Well, the difference between a random person online trying to cancel a celebrity and the actual FCC doing it is huge. And don't let these right wing hypocrites fool you into thinking otherwise. There's a there's a vast difference between the two. Again, Jimmy Kimmel was on for 22 years and would have been on still if the network did not cave to Trump. I know MAGAs love to invent new realities, but some of us care about facts and logic. So, for caving to the orange turd and canceling Kimmel, I canceled Hulu and the Disney Plus little subscription bundle that they have, and I'm also canceling Paramount Plus for canceling Stephen Colbert. I would have done that sooner, but the idea honestly and simply just didn't cross my mind until this more recent example of somebody being fired. So I do have to say, as a little bit of a personal note here, canceling Paramount Plus is a surprisingly tough decision. I'm somebody who loves a lot of TV shows and movies. I've written about stuff like that. I'm an entertainment writer, sometimes. And Paramount Plus has nearly all of the Friday the 13th movies, possibly all of the old Saturday Night Live episodes. Beavis and Butthead is also on Paramount Plus, and My Dear Egg Yokio is on there too, from Ren and Stimpy. So those are just a few things that I'm at least temporarily going to lose here. Now I don't know exactly how long I'm going to keep these things canceled. Maybe forever. Maybe just until, if society ever gets a little more normal again, and these two are sort of uncanceled. I don't know. I haven't really fully worked this out yet mentally, but it's a little bit more painful than a person might think, because I loved all those shows. I like being able to watch a Friday the 13th movie at will, like I said. So this is something that I don't want to exaggerate how hard it is, but it's a little bit harder than I thought. So I'm going to get a little bit into a lighter topic here, a little subtopic. Someone named Shirley Matta responded to me defending Jimmy Kimmel, and she said, I'm guessing you like evil people. And I responded, not interested in a relationship, but thanks for asking. So I think my response was a pretty good burn there. I twisted it around. um, but, I tried to have a few lighthearted moments in my reactions as well in that comment section on the Variety article. Um, but, the fact that she said, Jimmy Kimmel is an evil person, that's a good indication of where we're at. They think Trump critics are just evil, or that if you think Charlie Kirk was not a good person, you are evil. So Charlie Kirk hated Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Act. Keep that in mind. This is somebody that they're trying to act as if we should all view them as heroes, like, Charlie Kirk and people like him. And Charlie Kirk thought any prominent black women lacked mental capacity to actually do their job, and they only got in there because of, DEI or affirmative action or anything like that. That they don't have the mental capacity, the acuity to do their job. And somehow, we're not supposed to call people like that racist when they say those things. And, Charlie Kirk also suggested that Taylor Swift be obedient to her husband and suggested she had no value outside of having children. So think about that as I get a drink of water. And this is in addition to people like Pete Hegseth favoring or favorably sharing a video of a preacher who suggests that women shouldn't have the right to vote. So that's where we're at right now. This is the people that they think we're supposed to fawn over. And that's pretty dark. That's pretty dark. Not only should we critique people with extreme right wing views, we should feel obligated to do so. And don't let that fuckwit in the White House or that fuckwit at the FCC have you feeling otherwise. And that leads me to another interesting question. Why is Trump so sensitive now? Wasn't this the same guy who sat through a Comedy Central roast? Didn't he show us that he could take criticism, that he could take it as well as dish it out? While one key difference is an obvious shift in dynamics, he was not president back then. He didn't have the power of possibly using the state overall to crush people and to bend them to his will. He is power mad now. Things are different in the context of power, and we are finding out just how different in real time. So, don't let those, appearances on the Comedy Central roast and things like that make you get lost in the fog of what is happening here. He is ultra sensitive, he is thick skinned, and he was always that way. He was just apparently more capable of hiding it back then, and he obviously didn't have the power to totally go after his critics. And let's look at more of the official narrative here, how the FCC and the right wingers are defending this censorship, which again absolutely is what this is. ABC has indefinitely pulled Jimmy Kimmel Live after Jimmy Kimmel alleged that conservatives were misrepresenting the politics of the accused in Charlie Kirk's killing. Now, he might be wrong about that, but that's something for maybe the victim to settle in a lawsuit if he's being defamatory. If you were to have the FCC go after every host who said something factually inaccurate, well, how many of these news broadcasts would even be able to stay on the air? Practically none of them, right? You always are going to have some people getting some facts wrong. Some people are going to say the wrong thing. They might even, violate some broadcasting rule on the air, but you don't go after them every time. And in this case, it's obviously a targeted thing, you know. And on Thursday, FCC Chairman Brendan Carr asserted that Kimmel appeared to mislead American viewers when he said that the shooter, Tyler Robinson, or the alleged shooter, I still technically have to say that, I guess, was being portrayed as anything other than aligned with the MAGA movement. Carr called this directly misleading about a significant fact. Well, if, like I said, if they were going to go after people who are being misleading about a significant fact, Fox News would not be able to operate. Donald Trump would not be able to operate because he, remember, stated that Haitian immigrants in Ohio were eating cats and dogs. Now, tell me that wasn't misleading information that he presented during that presidential debate. But there's a double standard for him. He can lie as much as he wants, and nobody's allowed to criticize him for it. Never mind that conservatives joked about the attack on Nancy Pelosi's husband, and none of them cared whatsoever about the assassination of Minnesota State Representative Melissa Hortman, which happened not that long before Charlie Kirk's assassination. She was assassinated in a shooting at her home in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, in the United States. So, it happened in America. It's not some foreign land where this happened. It happened right here in the United States, in the Midwest, where I technically live. I live in Michigan, but Minnesota's relatively close by, so I know it's of importance because I'm from the Midwest. It's kind of reinforced in my mind that these issues are of importance because I'm living near them. Gun violence, it is a problem in this country. And, I could get into great details about gun violence. I know somebody who, you know, who was somewhat involved in a case where somebody's lawyer shot him in the head. Like, I mean, think about that. How many cases have you heard about where somebody's lawyer shoots their client in the head? Well, that happened around where I live. So, it's a reminder that gun violence can be a problem. And at one point, my own dad had his hunting rifle taken away because he's somebody who used to threaten to shoot up his workplace. And, there were times where, I mean, this is getting a little bit dark, but I debated actually, whether or not I should defend myself against my dad. If he was going to go on a violent rampage, I'll just put it like that. So, this idea that guns aren't at all a part of the problem. Guns represent freedom and blah 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 blah. Well, no, they don't always represent freedom. In fact, countries like North Korea, for example, they if you look at North Korea, they flood the world with illegal weapons, guns, small guns, military hardware, you name it. Uh, a lot of people don't know that about North Korea, but they're actually one of the countries that is involved in the illegal weapons trade around the world. So when people say that, oh, North Korea doesn't benefit from guns, well, guess again, they actually do. They are a tyrannical, dictatorial government. Well, if guns represent freedom, then why would they be flooding the world with more guns? That wouldn't make sense. But, that kind of narrative is too inconvenient for the guns equal freedom and safety crowd, so they never hear about it. And Hortman, she was the leader of the State House Democratic Caucus. She was killed alongside her husband, Mark. But, nobody talked about that. There was no call for, national unity about those assassinations. And of course, there were similar killings over the years. Well, over the decades, really. And I'll do an episode on that later on, possibly tomorrow. But as one news article noted yesterday about the Hortman shooting, Trump defended his decision not to fly flags at half mast when Hortman and her husband Mark were killed in June by claiming ignorance, despite making a statement on the tragedy several months ago. Well, if the governor had asked me to do that, I would have done that, Trump said after receiving clarification. But the governor of Minnesota didn't ask me. In June, Trump made comments after the attacks on Hoffman and Hortman and used it as an opportunity to criticize Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. So Trump is lying yet again. He knew about that assassination, or I guess technically those killings, but he lies as much as he breathes. He only ever tells the truth by accident. And, he's claiming that he didn't know about that, but he did. And I should say, I'm going to talk about some assassinations of liberals and leftists on my podcast tomorrow. You know, so if you want to check that out, go ahead. It'll probably be recorded later on in the day. It seems appropriate with all this phony talk about leftists being dangerous assassins. And also keep in mind the GOP deleted a study on political violence, which notes that most political violence is either done by the right or by Islamic extremists, though that is actually redundant, as Islamic extremists are 99.99% of the time right wingers in their own right. So I should also mention, while we're talking about violence, recent hanging deaths where cops initially claimed they were self inflicted. This happened just earlier this week, and it repeats a similar pattern from the year 2020, apparent clan style killings and apparent cover ups by the police, almost like perhaps they're working in tandem as a traditional good old boy network of cops collaborating with the Klan or with similar racist vigilante groups. It technically might not always be the Klan, but like a neo-Nazi style group or something like that. And they know that Trump's DOJ probably won't go after them because he is trying to create a white ethno state. So to wrap things up here, the key issue is that the FCC is targeting Trump's critics, just as Trump's critics suspected he would do. And ironically, that brings up another interesting and fascinating simple point. If Trump wanted fewer critics, all he would have to do is good, normal stuff. Stop acting like an authoritarian dipshit. And guess what? Fewer people will accuse you of being a thin skinned or orange skinned authoritarian dipshit. You thin skinned, orange skinned authoritarian dipshit. This is not rocket science. So, yes, maybe Jimmy Kimmel even got, some of his facts wrong on the assassination of Charlie Kirk. That's possible. But you know what? That is something best solved by a defamation case if there is proof that, those words were harmful, and you can maybe settle it out of court or something like that. This is not best left up to the FCC pressuring, the network to just cancel the show because he was a Trump critic. And that's the real reason. It's not the ratings. It's not because Jimmy Kimmel was on the dark side of, the spectrum or whatever the hell. Remember what I was talking about earlier, the person who framed it as light versus darkness somehow. No, it's not about that. It's because Trump is a thin skinned idiot who now has power and he's gone power mad. And, this is him retaliating against people because he can. That's the context. And that's really the main reason we need to maintain solidarity with, the critics of not just Donald Trump, but the far right in general, because if we give them an inch, they're going to take not just a mile, but they're going to take, 100 miles. That's the way these people are. They're going to, you know, turn back the clock as far as they possibly can. We'll have, not only might there be witch trials and things like that, not just symbolic witch trials, but literal witch trials, because these people believe in things like satanic witchcraft and demons, posing a threat against Christianity. These people they are religious extremists in a lot of cases, so they're gonna bring that stuff back if we let them. They've already started doing book burning type stuff. So, it's eventually we're gonna resort we're gonna look like just grunting cavemen beating each other with clubs if these people have their way. That's gonna be how we settle disputes in the not too distant future. It's going to be brutal and ugly. And you might not think it can happen here, but it is happening here. Just like as we're seeing with Israel bombing and starving the Palestinians. They will bomb and starve you if you let them, if you give them the full control of the government. That's not paranoia at this point. We're just in the early stages of this. What the US government is doing abroad, it can do here domestically, and we're seeing that unfold before our eyes. And that's also why it's important to, no, I mean, to the extent possible, no longer support the corporate Democrats either, because they are unfortunately caving all too easily in this. We see this with John Fetterman, for example. He is basically just a MAGA Republican who calls himself a Democrat. He is a perfect example of the Trojan horse style candidate who came into power while claiming to be a progressive, but now he's anything but that. We need more Zoran Mamdanis and less John Fettermans. And at the same time, we need to sometimes stand in solidarity, even if we're not the biggest fans of, like I can't say I watch Jimmy Kimmel or Stephen Colbert on the regular, but that's not really the point here. We need to stand in solidarity against government censorship, and it can make strange bedfellows in some cases, but the point is, you know, we need to stand against what the FCC is doing and applying pressure against all these Trump critics, because they're not going to stop here. They're going to go after anyone and everyone that they can. It's going to be an expansive effort. This is just the beginning of it. And if you don't think they're going to be applying any extreme violence in the future, well, what do you think all of these shows of military force in these Democrat cities, as they call them, is all about? What do you think that's about? It's to intimidate people, let them know that the almighty leader is watching, and if you criticize him even slightly, well, maybe you're going to be canceled. Maybe you're going to be imprisoned. Maybe you'll be deported because they don't care. Even if you're an American citizen, there's no due process rights. They can just claim you're a foreigner and off you go. So that's what we're dealing with here. This isn't just about whether or not you like Kimmel or Colbert. You know, this isn't this isn't a simple issue here. There's a whole lot wrapped up in here. We're dealing with superstitious lunatics. We're dealing with people who want to deprive women of the right to vote, and it's also racism involved in this too. There's so much. I mean, think about it like this. This is like the Christian Taliban, only instead of just having religious extremism against women. You've also got racism involved, probably more classism involved, because, I mean, you can say negative things about the Taliban, but I don't think they were necessarily a racist or are necessarily a racist organization. Well, add race on top of the Taliban as an issue, and you'll see what's at stake. And like I mentioned, when it comes to the genocide of the Palestinians, well, they're they're bombing the people out of existence. They're deliberately starving them, and that was unfortunately largely a bipartisan effort. But now, we're seeing that the violence is going to be expanded, and we got to stop it.